On a scorching summer day, January 26, 1966, the serene atmosphere of Glenelg Beach in Adelaide, Australia, was shattered by a tragedy that would haunt the nation for decades. Jane Beaumont, aged 9, her sister Arnna, aged 7, and their little brother Grant, only 4 years old, vanished without a trace while enjoying a carefree day by the ocean. What began as a typical day quickly turned into a nightmare that no one saw coming. By the time their parents realized something was wrong, it was too late. The children were gone, and the mystery of their disappearance would grip the country in fear and sadness. This case is not just about three missing siblings. It represents a moment when Australia lost its innocence, when the freedom of allowing children to roam safely in public places was suddenly questioned. The disappearance of the Beaumont children not only changed the lives of their family forever, but also altered how an entire nation viewed child safety. From that day forward, the carefree days of childhood freedom were replaced with heightened vigilance and concern, marking this event as one of Australia's most haunting cold cases. On the morning of January 26, 1966, the day started like any other for the Beaumont family. Jane, aged 9, Arnna, aged 7, and Grant, aged 4, were eager to spend their day at Glenelg Beach, a popular seaside destination just a short ride from their home in Somerton Park, a quiet suburb of Adelaide, Australia. The children were no strangers to the beach. In fact, they had visited Glenelg Beach many times before without any incident. Jane, being the eldest, had a sense of responsibility, and their mother, Nancy Beaumont, had full confidence in her daughter's ability to take care of her younger siblings. It was a different time, a period when children could roam more freely, and parents did not think twice about allowing their kids to explore the world around them without constant supervision. Nancy gave the children some money, just enough for bus fare and a light snack at the beach. The children boarded the bus around 8:45 in the morning, heading for a quick 5-minute ride to Glenelg Beach. It was a hot day, and like many other Adelaide residents, the Beaumont children were excited for a chance to cool off and enjoy some fun in the sun. Nancy expected them to be back by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, a typical return time after a few hours of play. However, as the afternoon progressed and the clock ticked past 2, her concern began to grow. By 3 o'clock, her worry had turned to panic. Something was wrong. The children were always punctual, and their failure to return on time was completely out of character. At 4 o'clock, Nancy's husband, Jim Beaumont, returned home from work. Together, they scoured the beach and nearby areas, hoping to find their children safe and sound. They questioned bus drivers, searched the beach, and knocked on doors, but there was no sign of Jane, Arnna, or Grant. At 5 o'clock, after hours of desperate searching, Nancy and Jim went to the police. A massive search effort was quickly mobilized, and the entire city of Adelaide soon became engrossed in what would become one of the most tragic and puzzling disappearances in Australian history. The carefree trip to Glenelg Beach, which had been a routine adventure for the Beaumont children, now marked the beginning of a nationwide mystery that remains unsolved to this day. As the clock passed 2 o'clock on that sweltering afternoon of January 26, 1966, Nancy Beaumont's anxiety began to grow. The Beaumont children had always been reliable, and their return from Glenelg Beach was typically on time. By 3 o'clock, the worry had turned to genuine panic. Nancy knew something was wrong.
When her husband, Jim, arrived home from work at 4 o'clock, the situation became even more alarming. The children were nowhere to be found, and it was completely out of character for them to be late without reason. Jim immediately sprang into action. He drove down to Glenelg Beach and began searching frantically. He scanned the busy sands for any sign of his children, asking strangers if they had seen Jane, Arnna, or Grant. He checked the bus stops, the shops, and the roads leading home, but there was no trace of them anywhere.
As the hours ticked by, the Beaumont parents grew increasingly desperate. The search expanded from the beach to their neighborhood, with Jim and Nancy knocking on doors, hoping that someone had spotted the children. They called friends and neighbors, but no one had any information. Fear settled in deeper as the minutes stretched into hours, and the reality that something terrible might have happened began to dawn on them. By 5 o'clock, with no leads and no sightings, Jim and Nancy made the difficult decision to involve the authorities. They rushed to the Glenelg police station, where they reported the children missing. The police immediately responded, aware of the growing concerns surrounding the disappearance of three young children in such a public space. Within hours, the largest search operation in South Australia's history was underway. Police officers, local volunteers, and even the Army and Navy were mobilized to assist in the search. Authorities began by scouring Glenelg Beach and its surrounding areas, from storm drains to nearby parks, hoping to find any sign of the missing children. Police divers searched the waters, and helicopters flew overhead to scan the coastline and nearby residential areas. Civilians joined the effort, searching alleyways, backyards, and vacant lots. The early response was swift, but the first few hours yielded no substantial clues. No one could imagine how three children could simply vanish in broad daylight from a crowded beach. As night fell, the Beaumont family and the people of Adelaide faced an unsettling realization. This wasn't a simple case of children wandering off. Something far more sinister might be at play. On the day the Beaumont children disappeared, several witnesses reported seeing them in the company of a mysterious man at Glenelg Beach. This man, described as being in his 30s, was tall, slender, and sun-tanned. He was also noted for wearing swim trunks, a common sight at the beach, but it was his interaction with the children that stood out to those who saw him. Witnesses observed that the Beaumont children appeared unusually comfortable with the man, which raised suspicions that they had met him on previous visits to the beach. This detail seemed significant to investigators, as Jane, the eldest, was known to be shy around strangers. It seemed unlikely that the children would be so relaxed and friendly with someone they had just met. One witness, a shopkeeper at a nearby bakery, confirmed this unusual behavior. Jane had come in to buy food for herself and her siblings, including a meat pie, something they had never bought before. She paid with a £1 note, an amount of money far more than what Nancy Beaumont had given them. This suggested that the mysterious man had given Jane the extra money. Another witness, a postman who knew the Beaumont children, reported seeing them walking along Jetty Road with the same man at around 11:45 am. The children were laughing and holding hands with him, further indicating a level of familiarity that was unusual for such young children to exhibit with a stranger. Despite these sightings, no one could positively identify the man, and his presence became one of the most perplexing elements of the case. The police immediately began to focus their investigation on this individual, believing he could be the key to solving the mystery. However, despite numerous public appeals and police sketches based on witness descriptions, the man was never identified. His role in the disappearance of the Beaumont children remains a chilling and unresolved aspect of the case. One of the most crucial sightings in the disappearance of the Beaumont children occurred at a nearby bakery on Mosley Street, close to Glenelg Beach. At approximately noon on January 26, 1966, Jane Beaumont was seen entering the bakery with her siblings, Arnna and Grant. The children had been given only enough money by their mother for bus fare and a light snack, but what stood out to the shopkeeper that day was the amount of food Jane purchased. She bought a substantial amount of items, including two large bottles of soda, pasties, and a meat pie, which was highly unusual for the children. The shopkeeper knew the Beaumont kids from their frequent visits, and they had never purchased such a large meal before. More curiously, Jane paid for the items using a £1 note, a significant sum that Nancy Beaumont had not given them. This raised immediate suspicions as to where the extra money had come from. Investigators quickly linked this purchase to the mysterious man who had been seen with the children earlier that day on the beach. It became clear that the children must have received the money from this man, as they were not carrying enough to make such a large purchase on their own. The bakery incident deepened the suspicion that this unknown man had ingratiated himself with the children, potentially grooming them over several visits to the beach. His act of giving Jane extra money, which was used to buy more food than usual, pointed to a calculated effort to gain their trust. This detail became a pivotal moment in the investigation, further solidifying the theory that the man was directly involved in their disappearance. However, despite the bakery sighting, no further leads emerged from the incident, and the man's identity remained a mystery. As the investigation into the Beaumont children's disappearance progressed, police quickly dismissed the idea that the children may have simply wandered off and met with an accident. Initially, some speculated that they might have drowned or gotten lost in the nearby sand dunes, but this theory was ruled out after an exhaustive search of the beach, surrounding areas, and storm drains yielded no evidence. Instead, investigators began to focus on the much darker possibility of abduction. The key to this shift in perspective was the repeated witness accounts describing the children's interactions with the mysterious man on Glenelg Beach. Multiple witnesses had seen Jane, Arnna, and Grant playing confidently with this sun-tanned individual, a man who did not appear to be a stranger to them. The fact that Jane had paid for the bakery items with a £1 note, despite only being given enough money for bus fare and lunch, further solidified the theory that the man had provided the extra cash. This suggested a premeditated effort on the part of the man to gain the children's trust. Additionally, the relaxed nature of the children's behavior around him indicated that this wasn't their first encounter, leading police to believe that the man had likely been grooming them during previous visits to the beach. Authorities quickly classified the case as an abduction, given that there was no evidence of a tragic accident and the circumstances surrounding the mysterious man were highly suspicious. This theory shaped the entire investigation, prompting a massive public appeal for any information that could identify the man. The police issued a sketch based on witness descriptions and launched a nationwide search. However, despite the urgency of the investigation and the significant public interest, no solid leads on the man's identity ever emerged. The decision to focus on abduction over accidental disappearance shifted the tone of the investigation from one of hopeful recovery to a grim realization that the children may have been deliberately taken, likely by someone with ill intent. This chilling possibility would continue to haunt investigators and the Australian public for decades to come. Following the chilling realization that the Beaumont children had likely been abducted, South Australian authorities launched the largest missing persons search in the country's history. The scope of the search was unprecedented, spanning 30 miles from Glenelg Beach across Adelaide and into surrounding areas. It involved hundreds of police officers, local volunteers, and military personnel, including units from the Army, Navy, and Air Force. The operation began immediately after the Beaumonts reported their children missing on the evening of January 26, 1966. The initial focus was on the beach itself, with officers scouring every inch of Glenelg from the shoreline to the dunes and nearby parks. Authorities searched storm drains, combed through the sand, and even employed divers to search the murky waters of a nearby marina, which was drained a week later. Despite their exhaustive efforts, no sign of Jane, Arnna, or Grant was found. As days passed, the search extended further. Helicopters flew overhead to scan the vast coastline, while volunteers combed through dense bushland and vacant lots. There was even a focus on local cemeteries, sewage channels, and warehouses in hopes of finding any clues that might lead to the missing children. Local communities rallied together, with thousands of Adelaide residents taking part in the search, hoping against hope that they might stumble upon something overlooked. Despite the massive scale of the operation, no significant evidence emerged. No clothing, belongings, or even footprints were discovered. The lack of physical evidence deepened the mystery and compounded the investigators' frustration. The sheer size and intensity of this search set it apart as the most thorough and extensive missing persons operation in Australian history up to that point. Yet, despite the overwhelming effort, the disappearance of the Beaumont children remained as baffling as ever. The case would soon shift from a physical search to a battle of theories and investigations, but this initial period marked the beginning of a long, heartbreaking journey for both the Beaumont family and the Australian public. The disappearance of the Beaumont children quickly became a national obsession, driven in large part by the intense media coverage. From the moment the story broke, newspapers and television stations across Australia covered every development, amplifying the case to a level of public awareness never seen before in the country. Headlines about the missing children dominated front pages for weeks, and photos of Jane, Arnna, and Grant were plastered across news outlets, keeping the case in the public eye. The Australian media played a significant role in galvanizing the public to help in the search efforts. Television segments and newspaper articles appealed to people to come forward with any information, no matter how small. The widespread media attention created a nationwide frenzy, with citizens in Adelaide and beyond eager to assist in any way they could. Thousands of tips flooded in, many of which were based on witness sightings or theories about the mysterious man seen with the children on the beach. As the days and weeks passed without any solid leads, the media's relentless coverage fueled various theories about what might have happened to the Beaumont children. Some speculated that the children had been taken by a criminal gang, while others believed they had been transported out of the country. There were even wild stories involving psychic investigators and clairvoyants, including Dutch psychic Gerard Croiset, who claimed to have visions of the children's location. His involvement garnered significant media attention but ultimately led nowhere. Despite the flood of tips and theories, none led to the discovery of the children. Each lead seemed to end in a dead end, and the public, though deeply invested, was left with more questions than answers. However, the case remained a fixture in the news cycle for years, as every new tip or theory reignited the nation's hope that the mystery might finally be solved. The media's involvement ensured that the disappearance of the Beaumont children would be remembered as one of the most notorious unsolved cases in Australian history. In the wake of the Beaumont children's disappearance, the Australian police and public became desperate for answers. The lack of leads led to the involvement of more unconventional methods, including consulting psychics and clairvoyants. One of the most prominent figures in this regard was Dutch clairvoyant Gerard Croiset, who was flown to Australia in November of 1966 to assist in the search. Croiset claimed to have visions of the children's location and made headlines across the nation as his involvement became a media spectacle. He suggested that the children were buried in a warehouse kiln near their home, a claim that generated significant attention and prompted a large-scale excavation at the site. Local residents and volunteers raised 40,000 Australian dollars to fund the demolition of the warehouse in the hopes of recovering the missing children's remains. The event was highly publicized, with television cameras on site as the building was torn down piece by piece. The public eagerly awaited a breakthrough in the case, convinced that Croiset's visions might finally bring closure to the Beaumont family. However, the search was ultimately a disappointment. After extensive excavation, no evidence was found to support Croiset's claims, and the site yielded no remains or clues related to the missing children. Despite the attention and hope surrounding his involvement, Croiset's efforts did not bring the case any closer to being solved. His changing stories and lack of results gradually caused the public and the authorities to lose faith in his abilities. Croiset's involvement marked a turning point in the case as it highlighted the desperation of both the police and the public to find answers. While psychics and clairvoyants occasionally offered their services in high profile cases, Croiset's failure underscored the need for concrete evidence, not visions or speculative theories. The investigation returned to traditional methods after this episode, but Croiset's participation remains a memorable chapter in the ongoing mystery of the Beaumont children. 2 years after the disappearance of the Beaumont children, hope resurfaced for their devastated parents when they received two letters in the mail. The first letter was supposedly written by Jane, while the second came from a man claiming to be their abductor. In the letters, Jane wrote about her siblings being safe and well and referred to a man who was keeping them. This man also wrote that he had become the children's self appointed guardian and was willing to return them. He proposed a meeting location where he would hand the children back to their parents. Desperate to believe their children might still be alive, Jim and Nancy Beaumont, along with a detective, drove to the designated meeting spot. However, when they arrived, no one showed up. They waited for hours, but the alleged abductor never appeared. Some time later, a third letter arrived, again purportedly from Jane, stating that the man had realized a detective was present at the meeting and decided not to return the children after all. This letter crushed the Beaumonts as it gave a false sense of hope, only to take it away in the cruelest manner. In 1992, decades after the letters were sent, modern forensic analysis was conducted on the letters. It was then discovered that they had been part of a sick hoax. The author of the letters was identified as a man who had been a teenager at the time. He had written the letters as a joke, never intending for them to cause such emotional devastation. Due to the time that had passed and the fact that he was a minor when he committed the hoax, no charges were brought against him. The hoax letters were another tragic chapter in the Beaumont case, offering false hope and reopening old wounds for the family. The cruel nature of the hoax only deepened the public's sympathy for the Beaumonts, who continued to live with the anguish of their children's unresolved disappearance. Over the years, several suspects have been considered in connection with the disappearance of the Beaumont children, though none have been definitively linked to the crime. Among the most prominent suspects was Harry Phipps, a wealthy Adelaide businessman and factory owner. Phipps came to the attention of investigators after his own son, Hayden, implicated him in the crime. Hayden claimed that in January of 1966, the same month the children disappeared, his father had asked him and another boy to dig a large hole on the factory grounds. This led to suspicions that Phipps may have been involved in burying the children. Phipps was also known for his erratic behavior and had a history of sexually abusing children. Witness descriptions of the man seen with the Beaumont children on the day of their disappearance eerily matched Phipps' appearance, tall, thin, and wearing a distinctive suit. In 2013, the factory site was excavated based on Hayden's claims, but no evidence of the children's remains was found. Despite this, Phipps remains one of the most intriguing suspects in the case. Another significant suspect was James O'Neill, a convicted child murderer who was operating in Tasmania around the time of the disappearance. O'Neill had a history of abducting and murdering children, and his violent tendencies led some investigators to suspect he could have been involved in the Beaumont case. However, despite interviews and thorough investigations into his whereabouts, no conclusive evidence emerged to tie O'Neill to the Beaumont children. Derek Percy, another convicted child killer, was also scrutinized. Percy was believed to have been in Adelaide around the time of the disappearance and was known for his disturbing history of child murders. However, like O'Neill, Percy was never definitively linked to the case. These suspects, among others, were investigated over the years, yet none provided the breakthrough needed to solve the mystery. While promising leads would arise, each ultimately led to dead ends, leaving the case of the Beaumont children unresolved. The lack of definitive evidence and the fading memories of witnesses have left the case shrouded in mystery, with investigators continuing to search for answers even decades later. The disappearance of the Beaumont children left an unimaginable emotional toll on their parents, Jim and Nancy Beaumont. From the moment the children went missing, Jim and Nancy were thrust into a relentless nightmare, one filled with uncertainty, heartache, and a lingering sense of helplessness. Despite the overwhelming odds and years of dead end investigations, they never gave up hope that their children might still be alive, particularly Nancy. Nancy Beaumont clung to the belief that Jane, Arnna, and Grant could someday return, holding out hope even as the years passed and the chances of finding them alive grew slimmer. Her love for her children and the possibility, however faint, of their survival sustained her through the darkest moments. However, this hope also meant that Nancy had to endure repeated emotional blows, such as the hoax letters and the numerous false leads that raised her hopes, only to dash them again. Jim Beaumont, although more private in his grief, carried the same burden of loss. In the early days following the disappearance, he tirelessly searched for his children, driving through the streets of Adelaide and following every lead he could. But as the years went by, the weight of the tragedy took its toll. Jim and Nancy's marriage eventually succumbed to the strain caused by the disappearance, and they separated years after the tragedy. The long lasting effects of this tragedy were profound. Both Jim and Nancy lived the remainder of their lives with the unresolved pain of not knowing what happened to their children. Nancy, in particular, was known to keep a room ready for her children's return, a quiet testament to the hope that never truly faded. Sadly, Nancy passed away in 2019 without ever learning the truth, while Jim remains out of the public eye, carrying the grief of the unsolved case. The Beaumont family's tragedy became a symbol of the fragility of safety and innocence, not only for their community, but for all of Australia. Their story remains one of the most heartbreaking examples of how a single event can forever alter the course of a family's life, leaving an emotional void that can never be filled. Over the decades, the Beaumont children's disappearance remained a haunting mystery, and investigators never gave up searching for new clues. Despite numerous promising leads and several high profile investigations, each attempt ended in frustration, deepening the sense of helplessness surrounding the case. One of the most prominent developments came in 2013 when the factory site of Harry Phipps, a local businessman and a key suspect, was excavated. Phipps' son had claimed that his father asked him and another boy to dig a large hole on Australia Day in 1966, the same day the Beaumont children vanished. This revelation led to significant interest from investigators, and the factory grounds were searched thoroughly. However, despite the public and media anticipation, no human remains were found, and the investigation hit another dead end. In 2018, investigators returned to the same factory site for another excavation, spurred on by renewed interest in Phipps' potential involvement. Advanced technology was used to scan the area for signs of disturbed earth or human remains, but once again, the search yielded no significant evidence. The frustration following these fruitless digs was palpable, as each new lead seemed promising but only deepened the mystery. Another promising lead surfaced in 2016 when a new suspect, a known child molester and former Boy Scout leader, was questioned. He had been living in Glenelg Beach at the time of the disappearance, and his past criminal behavior made him a person of interest. Despite the potential connection, investigators were unable to find any concrete evidence linking him to the crime. Over the years, investigators continued to pursue every possible lead, from claims of sightings in remote areas to theories involving convicted child killers like Derek Percy and James O'Neill. However, none of these lines of inquiry provided the breakthrough that investigators and the public so desperately hoped for. Each lead, no matter how promising it seemed, ended in frustration and further cemented the Beaumont case as one of Australia's most baffling unsolved mysteries. Despite these setbacks, the case has never been officially closed, and detectives still remain hopeful that new technology or a fresh lead could one day provide the answers that have eluded investigators for so long. The disappearance of the Beaumont children left an indelible mark on Australia, fundamentally altering how the nation viewed child safety and leading to significant changes in both societal behavior and government policy. Before the tragedy, Australia was a more carefree and trusting society where it was common for children to roam freely without supervision. However, the sudden vanishing of Jane, Arnna, and Grant Beaumont shattered this sense of security and forever changed how parents viewed the safety of their children. The case sparked a nationwide conversation about the dangers that children could face even in familiar and seemingly safe environments like beaches and neighborhoods. The overwhelming media attention and public fear surrounding the disappearance led to increased vigilance among parents who became far more protective of their children. This cultural shift marked the beginning of an era in which children were no longer allowed the same level of freedom to explore independently as parents became more aware of the potential risks. The case also had a profound effect on child protection laws in Australia. The disappearance of the Beaumont children, along with other high profile cases that followed, prompted the government to implement tighter laws aimed at protecting children. This included the establishment of new protocols for investigating missing children cases and the introduction of education programs to raise public awareness about child abductions. Communities and schools also began to place greater emphasis on teaching children about stranger danger, and the idea of trusting strangers became more heavily scrutinized. Furthermore, the Beaumont case paved the way for more advanced investigative practices and the use of media as a tool in missing persons cases. The case demonstrated the power of public engagement and media coverage in mobilizing search efforts and keeping cases in the public eye. This media focus became a precedent for future child abduction cases, ensuring that missing children cases received widespread attention and rapid response. The legacy of the Beaumont children's disappearance is one of tragedy, but it also serves as a reminder of the need for vigilance and protection in safeguarding children. The changes in social behavior, the evolution of child protection laws, and the awareness raised by this case have left a lasting impact on Australia, even decades after the event. Despite the passage of nearly 6 decades, the disappearance of the Beaumont children remains one of Australia's most haunting cold cases. Over the years, countless theories have been proposed and exhaustive investigations have taken place, but the mystery persists. No definitive answers have ever surfaced regarding what happened to Jane, Arnna, and Grant Beaumont on that fateful summer day in 1966. From promising suspects like Harry Phipps and convicted child killers James O'Neill and Derek Percy to the numerous tips and psychic interventions, each lead has ended in frustration. Despite the involvement of advanced technology, multiple excavations, and continued efforts by law enforcement, there has been no significant breakthrough in the case. The Beaumont children's disappearance has left a lingering scar on the national psyche as Australia continues to grapple with the unresolved nature of this case. The public's desire for closure remains strong and the case is still open, with investigators committed to solving it. The South Australian government and law enforcement have kept a $1 million reward on offer for any information that could lead to the discovery of the children's whereabouts or provide definitive answers about their fate. This tragedy has endured as a painful reminder of the vulnerability of children and the importance of vigilance in child safety. Though decades have passed, the enduring mystery of the Beaumont children continues to captivate and disturb the nation. The hope that one day the truth will finally emerge remains and the search for answers continues. If you or anyone you know has information that could help solve this case, please reach out to the authorities. The Beaumont family, along with all of Australia, still waits for the day when the mystery of Jane, Arnna, and Grant is finally brought to light.